Welcome back to the Bears Talk Ireland podcast as we continue our coverage of the Chicago Bears off-season. As usual, it's another exciting season when it comes to the Bears. We've just got through the NFL draft, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Wiederer, who's a beat reporter for the Chicago Tribune and also a co-host on the Take the North podcast. Dan, welcome to the show.
I know. How are you?
Not too bad. You keeping well?
Doing well overall. The weather's starting to turn here for the better here in Chicago, so I think we're going to be back out at the practice field before too long with these Bears.
Sounds good. We've even got a good bit of nice weather here in Ireland, which is unusual at the moment as well, but enjoy it while we have it. Dan, sorry, as I said, we've just had the draft. It's always an exciting time in the off season when you're covering the NFL. The draft, I think it gets bigger every year. I mean, we won't go into every single player in the Bears draft, but when we kind of look at the first move that the Bears made, obviously it's tight end Colston Loveland, which seemed to surprise some people. Other people kind of had it pegged, but a lot of people thought if they went tight end, it'd be Tyler Warren. And other people, there was a lot of talk of the Bears making a move up to get an Ashton Genty. I mean, before we actually talk about Loveland, was there any truth to these rumors? Was that just something that was being put out there, or did the Bears actually try to make that move and maybe it was just a little too rich for them?
Yeah, I think there was definitely some significant interest in Ashton Genty as a player. I think they saw him as the guy who was going to be the last remaining blue chip player on their draft board, and they were aggressive at least exploring the possibility of going up there. Now, to get ahead of the Raiders, to jump from 10 to 5, I think the price tag was a little bit too rich, particularly in a draft where they felt like they would still have some good options for them at 10. And that's just kind of how the draft works. You kind of have to have a best case scenario and then a whole other bunch of plans that you'll be happy with regardless. And they wound up there. I think equally interesting is that I'm still very curious, and this is more just a personal curiosity than anything, if they would have drafted Calvin Banks Jr., the offensive tackle out of Texas, had he been there at 10 instead of Loveland. It's one of those questions we probably will never know the for sure answer to, but I think that might have been the best case scenario for the Bears. And then ultimately they got themselves a pass catcher that can be very friendly to both Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I think the Bears will tell you absolutely not. They got the number one player on the board, and that's what they wanted. But look, if he delivers, we'll all be happy with that. But yeah, look, you mentioned he's an explosive weapon. He's a pass catcher. He's someone who can go in there and be a very important part of a Ben Johnson offense with a young quarterback who's still developing. I mean, what did you make of this draft pick overall and Colston Loveland coming in to that tight end room?
There's a lot to be intrigued by, and I think it starts with Colston Loveland's ability to separate. He's such a natural route runner and has such a good combination of athleticism and strength and understanding of how to run routes and use his body to get himself open. That's going to be a big deal for a quarterback that's going to need that security blanket and that little safety valve at times in this offense. And also, Colston Loveland can be a big play guy. I do think that, as you mentioned earlier, that the Bears had Tyler Warden graded highly as well. They just ultimately thought that Loveland was a little bit better of fit, better as a route runner, and it's better complement to Cole Kmet. So now, with Ben Johnson wanting to do a lot of two tight end stuff within his offense, you've got two guys that can do things similar in some ways and different in other ways. And it's going to present some matchup problems for opponents to try to figure out how you're going to defend that. Oh, by the way, you mix in all the other dynamic weapons they have in the receiving core and in the backfield, and you've got the makings of an offense that should, again, be very friendly to both Ben and Caleb. And so it'll be interesting. Loveland right now is still recovering from shoulder surgery that he had in January. So he will not participate in the rookie minicamp that's coming up this week at Hallis Hall. But you would hope that in the very early stages of training camp, he's cleared, he's ready to go, and we can start to see him sort of acclimating and working on that synergy with Caleb Williams.
I think digging into him, he looks like a very exciting player, and he's only a young player as well. So
very
hopefully
young.
He's someone who could develop over the years. I mean, what he is now, 2 or 3 years from now, he could really make that kind of step up as he gets that little bit older. I mean, obviously, another question that then arose from this draft pick is Cole Kmet. A lot of people asking, is Cole Kmet done now? Is he finished? I mean, I never thought that. I thought he actually looks like a good foil for a Cole Kmet. How do you see that dynamic working now as the Bears go forward?
Yeah, Cole is by no means finished. The 2025 season will be very telling. The extension that Cole signed a couple years ago really kind of expires at the end of this year. That's when the guaranteed money ends, and there'll be opportunity for the Bears to get out of it if they so desire. I don't think that's the way they're leaning. I think they think that this can be a very dynamic tandem with Loveland and Kmet, and that they can work very well together. And if they can start to get results and produce in ways that create victories, then everybody's happy and you roll forward. But that's going to be a big experiment in 2025 for Ben Johnson and the entire offense to try to figure out how to make that work and how to make that click, particularly with all the other guys they've got to get involved. In the short term, Cole Kmet is his status is very secure. He's one of the leaders on this team, the veterans that can show the way. I think it'll be a really good resource for Colston Loveland as well, as Colston comes in with a very strong reputation as a hard worker and a kid from a really small town in Idaho who's going to come in and grind. And Cole will show him the way to grind, and hopefully they can make some sweet music together.
I think they're two good players, and hopefully they will develop together, and that could be a really good tandem going forward. When we look at the next round, then you obviously mentioned in the Colston Loveland draft pick that there's questions of whether or not they would have gone a different player just one spot before. Is that the case then in the second round? Could a Travion Henderson have been the one they were maybe looking at, and then a Luther Burden, another exciting pass catcher who could really benefit this offense and this young quarterback? I mean, how do you see this pick? Do you think this is one that the Bears just couldn't pass up with a player who himself seems very disappointed to have been there at this stage? And do you think maybe they were targeting that running back prior, and then this was the next kind of best player that was sitting there waiting for them?
Yeah, two roads to go down there, because you're right on the money here. The bullseye has been hit with this idea that Travion Henderson was definitely a target for the Bears. I think they were aggressive and actually trying to trade up to get him. Thought they might have had a deal done with the Tennessee Titans and ultimately didn't get that done. I think the Titans may have traded that pick elsewhere. Probably got a little bit more in the compensation package, and then they were working the phones with New England, trying to get up one spot on the board. And then New England at the last minute said, we're going to stick here and pick. And not only did they decide to stick there and pick, they picked the guys the Bears wanted. And so Henderson came off the board. And then, as Ryan Poles said all throughout draft weekend, he was trying to let the Bears draft evaluations and their draft board speak to them. And they said that draft board told them that Luther Burden was clearly the best player on their board, even if it was at a position where they feel pretty secure with obviously DJ Moore and Roma Dunze and Olamide Zaccheaus. They went and pulled the trigger on a guy that they think can be really, really dynamic, really, really good football player with the ball in his hands, explosive, had a really good 2023 season. Production dipped a little bit in 2024, and there has to be some research into figuring out why. And now the experiment happens with Luther Burden as well, which for me, Noel, the big question is if you're Ben Johnson, how do you make this work with so many different people to keep involved? And that, I think, is going to be the next big challenge for a first-time head coach, is to figure out how to do that in a way where everyone is happy, engaged, focused, and understanding what the big picture is for the entire offense.
That's it. There's so many weapons on the offense now, just to see the way he's able to maybe get everybody a share of the ball and keep everybody happy. But I think if it clicks and it's working and they're winning, I think everybody be happy. I think people are happy when you're winning, and then is if things go the other way, then that's definitely then where this coaching staff need to really come in and work with the players. We look at the next draft pick then, which is another offensive player in Ozzy Trapillo, the tackle. I mean, I found this pick fascinating. There was obviously a lot of talk of, will Darnell Wright move? And the Bears haven't ruled that out. Or will Trapillo, who played right tackle, will he go left tackle and battle it out with Braxton Jones and Karan Amagaji? And it seems to be now that looks the way it's going to be. Ryan Poles talking recently that they're probably going to start him on the left, especially with Braxton Jones being injured. I mean, what do you make of this pick, and how do you think this kind of shakes out as we get more into the offseason?
I really do think these next 7 or 8 weeks will be fascinating as the Bears get into rookie minicamp and then their OTAs and then their full-time minicamp to experiment a little bit at those tackle positions. You mentioned that Braxton Jones won't be available to them at all during this next stretch. And so you're going to have to give those reps somewhere. And I think it's going to be kind of a combination of, okay, what does Trapillo look like at left tackle? How does Karan Amagaji look in year 2 at that position? Oh, by the way, as you mentioned, Darnell Wright, why don't you slide over there for a day or parts of a day and see how that feels, see how that looks. And they can dabble a little bit. They can use their time here to kind of feel out what combination makes the most sense, which guy feels most secure over there, and then operate accordingly. I think the goal is to have those questions answered as much as you can by the time training camp starts, or at least within the first week of camp, so that by the time you start going into preseason games and getting into that middle stretch of training camp, who you want to be your week 1 starting left tackle. And you're not just playing the guessing game all throughout the month of August, because we've done that with Bears offensive lines in the past. It doesn't work out really well when you're just guessing and trying to figure it out on the fly through the entire preseason. And so as it relates to Trapillo, this is a golden opportunity, as a second-round pick, to come in and show these coaches what you're made of, what your best strengths are, and to carve out a leading role. I've told people now for 2 weeks that this is not a day 3, dice roll pick that they made. This is a second-round pick. That's a premium investment in the draft. You expect that guy to ultimately become a starter for you. How quickly and where is the next question, but certainly Trapillo was targeted with the belief that he could become a starter who stays here for the long term and gets a second contract with the Bears.
I think it's fascinating, this pick, and you've kind of you've stole my thunder on my next question, which was, if you are a second round pick coming in, is there that kind of pressure or expectation, should we say, that you are starting fairly quickly? I mean, you are a second round pick, but I think also a young player like that coming into an offensive line that, while it's much changed, has brought in a lot of experience. And obviously, if he does start at left tackle, sure, there's not many better players to have beside you than Joe Thuney. So this is someone who could really benefit a young player coming in if he were to win that starting job. But again, like I say, if you're a second round draft pick, you mentioned it, you do feel like you've got to be getting into that starting lineup fairly quickly.
No question. And you make a good point, because when you look to your right and Joe Thuney's there, it gives everybody a little bit more comfort and calm. And that's the play caller, that's the quarterback, that's the other offensive lineman. The question here with Trapillo is just how quickly he can kind of acclimate and get comfortable. I've reminded people this month that Braxton Jones came in as a 5th round draft pick. And by the time they left the offseason program, it was like, yeah, he's going to be our starter as a rookie. That was a 5th round guy, right? Like, that's a late day 3 guy. Second round guy certainly has that potential if he can get himself acclimated quickly, in sync with the new offensive line coach, Dan Rochar, and giving some confidence to Ben Johnson that he'll be reliable and steady. And those were the 2 words that were written in Sharpie on his scouting report: reliable and steady. As a guy that didn't commit a lot of penalties, was pretty smart, really understands the position very well. Now it's just, what does the comfort look like at the NFL level, and how quickly can you get there?
Yeah, I mean, this whole off season for the offensive line has been fascinating. I mean, we could go into the new season with one player from last season and the rest of the line being new players who are brought in. And again, football is played on the field, not on paper, but on paper it does look like they've made some good moves. So definitely we'll be keeping an eye on that. We look then again, we have another second round pick, and finally Dennis Allen has some shiny new toy to play with on the defensive line, and that's Shamar Turner coming in. I mean, what do you make of this pick with Turner coming in? Bit of a feisty character when you dig into his tape and see some of the clips.
You're probably referencing one clip in particular where he was thrown out of a football game for throwing a punch somewhere where you don't want to get punched. But look, like the word that was attached to Shamar Turner often over draft weekend was violent. This is a guy who plays with violence. It can get him into trouble at times. He has an edge that sometimes crosses the line, and you get some of those personal foul penalties that you're going to have to eliminate at the NFL level. But I think they love the combination of, you used a good adjective there, feisty. He's a feisty guy, and he's a guy that plays with tenacity and spirit, and so you add that to the defense with his speed and his ability to play both inside and outside and move around for you a little bit. And there's some intrigue here about what Dennis Allen can do with a piece like that. I think initially you're looking at a rotational role for Shamar Turner. I think your starters probably in week 1 are going to be Grady Jarrett and Javon Dexter on the interior of the line, with Turner and Andrew Billings kind of working in as part of the rotation. It's going to be fascinating to see how this all comes together. My big question with Shamar Turner is he played through a stress fracture in his leg last season, and he played pretty well overall, all things considered, but the stress fracture occurred after he put on weight in order to be able to move inside and play more inside. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but I don't know that there's not a correlation there. And so it'd be really worth keeping an eye on kind of how he is physically as they figure out what role they want him to have on, what his ideal playing weight is, and whether he can handle that, because that's obviously a big deal for a player of that stature, is to be able to play at full strength and full explosion while not also being pushed around because you're too light.
Yeah, I mean that obviously is a big question, is the injury. I mean, look, I'm sure the Bears do their homework and they know, they've talked to all doctors, but still you always get worried, and especially as Bears fans, we have a history of players coming in with injuries and they just seem to never kind of go away. So again, he looks like a really good player. He looks like he could add something in there, but it'll be interesting to see. I think the next player is probably the biggest head scratcher for a lot of people in the fourth round, and that's Ruben Hippolyte, the linebacker who, I mean, you mentioned speed for Shamar Turner earlier. I think speed is the one thing that really gets thrown around with Ruben Hippolyte and his 40 time. I mean, were you caught off guard as well with this pick? And what do you kind of make of where the Bears have gone with this one?
Oftentimes on day 3, you're sitting there, you're waiting for a pick to be made. And that was a pick that was made after the Bears traded back. Again, it was one of their trade back situations. And you're not really sure where they've landed. And they landed with a linebacker who, as you mentioned, I think he ran a 4.42 40-yard dash at his pro day, which it's eye-popping speed. How does that translate to the football field? Well, the production at Maryland wasn't as high as you might want it. Certainly something that Dennis Allen will be intrigued by. How do we use the speed? Obviously, you're going to be part of a linebacking core that already has its starters figured out with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards for 2025. Can he carve out a special teams role immediately and help you there? It's a big question mark. I think that's the best way to put that. This pick was a big question mark. And I think probably the biggest question mark that came up as a relation to it was that it came as the running back aisle of the draft store was being depleted. And you thought that at some point the Bears were going to be able to get into this talent-rich running back class. And then all of a sudden they traded out of a spot early on day 3 and drafted a linebacker that nobody knew a ton about. Going to have to just kind of watch this one play out, see what role they have figured out for him, and see if Hippolyte can maximize the opportunities that they give him.
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, I'll be honest, I didn't know too much about him. I found it an interesting pick. I mean, obviously, a lot of people were disappointed Jack Sanborn wasn't able to keep on the roster and work with this new coaching staff here. But again, when you look at these two players, and the difference is what we talked about, Sanborn isn't considered a very quick linebacker. He's a very smart linebacker who you feel always ends up where the ball is, but he doesn't have that blistering pace which Hippolyte does, which obviously is something that this coaching staff kind of wanted, I guess. And
yeah,
again, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, just because a player isn't on everyone's board doesn't mean he can't come in and take that step up. So looking forward to kind of seeing what he brings to the team. The next couple of picks were Zach Frazier, the cornerback, and Luke Newman, the O-lineman. I mean, what do you anything stand out about these two guys? Do you see them being able to force their way in?
The interesting nugget on Frazier is that Al Harris, the new secondary coach, was out, taking a look at players and thought that this was a guy that had some potential there. And so that endorsement came from within the coaching staff in addition to the talent evaluation team at Hallis Hall. It'd be interesting to see what kind of role he can carve out. They think he's got speed, he's got length. Dennis Allen wants to play a lot of man coverage. They see a guy that can do that, fit into that role, and make some things happen. He's got good ball skills, and you're hoping again that this can be a developmental guy that can carve out a role. Look, that's going to be a feisty competition at cornerback. You obviously know Jalen Johnson is your number one. And then you've got Tyreek Stevenson and Terrell Smith on the outside that really need to kind of state a case to the new coaching staff on why they deserve to have the roles that they want. And so it's going to be fun to watch that. Frazier is one of those classic traits guys from University of Texas, San Antonio. And you want to see how a coaching staff that's new, that you don't have a whole lot of familiarity with, figures out how to tap into the traits, because the traits really don't mean anything if they don't translate into production on the football field. And now it's going to be up to Frazier to figure that out here in the next, several months. And then obviously when preseason action starts, that's a real proving ground for a lot of these defensive backs who are trying to make a roster or carve out a bigger role. And Frazier will certainly be in that mix. And I think you mentioned Newman. That's depth for your offensive line right now. I think that's what it is. There's not a real deep discussion we can have about a guy that, started at Holy Cross, transferred to Michigan State, had one season at Michigan State, and did enough for the Bears to say, okay, we can see something here that can give us some reliable depth on the interior of our line. And he does play a little bit of center, and I think that was attractive too, where they thought, okay, this guy can play all three positions on the interior for us, and we can feel good about that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people kind of say that he could be a very good backup center for the Bears for Judom. And so, look, if that's even a role he plays, then sure that's something that's important to have in there. The last draft pick, I didn't lump him with the other two because I have a bit of a soft spot for this draft pick. I realize he's a 7th-round pick. I'm not saying he's going to come out and be a first or your first running back on the roster or whatever. But I like the way he runs. He's obviously not very quick, but he seems like that small, kind of strong running back who can take contact and seems very good at being patient and hitting that hole when it's there. So what did you make of the Bears finally getting into the running back game in the 7th round with Kyle Monangai?
I had to get that sneeze out there before I answered that question. Look, like this is nothing against Kyle Monangai, but it was the 22nd running back taken in a draft class that was touted for how good the running back class was going to be. And when you go from dreams in Chicago of Ashton Genty being picked in the first hour of the draft to finally taking your running back in round 7 in the final hour of the draft, there's a little bit of a buzz that comes down, and so Kyle Monangai is going to have his chance to get in that running backs room, to pair up with Eric Bieniemy, to show this coaching staff where he could potentially fit. But look, they've got DeAndre Swift as their lead back right now. They currently have Roschon Johnson in a position where he can take on a different role in 2025, hopefully a little bit more heightened. Ian Wheeler's coming back from the ACL surgery. It's a bit of a crowded running backs room, even though it's a little bit unsettled right now. And so Monangai is going to have to earn every rep that he wants to have there because they've got competition in that room. And there's not a long list, Noel, of 7th-round running backs who became anything. I wrote down a handful of guys that were picked late on day 3, round 6 or round 7, that turned into names that you remember. Isaiah Pacheco, the easiest one to remember. Latavius Murray, Alfred Morris, Peyton Hillis, and Ahmad Bradshaw. Beyond that, they're not a long list of guys who are taken late on day 3 who become staples in your backfield. So a little bit of an uphill climb, even though there has been some clear buzz among Bears fans about what they see on the Rutgers film from Kyle Monangai.
Yeah, you always have to have that one player coming in with the long shot that everyone has to back. Why not? You need to get behind that somehow. But I mean, yeah, look, I think it's an interesting pick. You mentioned that how short it is of players being drafted in around this position that actually go on to have a big career. But I've heard a lot of people say he should have gone 4th or 5th, and a less strong running back class. I choose to believe them just because. And I've even heard 1 or 2 people call him Genty light. Again, I just choose to believe them. I'll buy the hype.
Hey, look, we've got 4 months to buy the hype, right? Like the Bears don't have a game. And by the way, their schedule comes out next week. So we'll have a roadmap of what that schedule looks like. Until then, we've got months to fill with feeling good and optimistic and hype filled. And as you know, as well as anyone, the Bears have now won 3 consecutive offseason championships. And so that's a very big deal for the folks in Chicago. It's time to start winning some football games when the regular season starts. But in the offseason, they're undefeated because they certainly know how to create the buzz and the energy and the optimism. And now it's just got to be matched once they start playing real football in September.
Absolutely. And sorry, one kind of omission from the draft. I know they picked up a couple of UDFAs, is the safety position. Now, we all know Jaquan Brisker has had some injury issues, and hopefully this year he'll be able to get over that. But obviously it's concerning the number of concussions and time he's missed, and you hope everything is okay there. Then Kevin Byard is obviously a little bit older, so they're your 2 starting safeties. I mean, did you think that the Bears may have hit a safety somewhere in this draft rather than just UDFAs, or do you think there's still time to be sorting out this position, because who knows where they'll be next year? I think this may be Brisker's last year of his contract.
Yeah.
Again, Kevin Byard is older there. So, I mean, it feels like this time next year, there could be a very big hole at safety, which I was kind of hoping they would start to address now.
And you're hopeful that it's this time next year and not this time October, right? Like where you do suffer an injury or 2 and all of a sudden your depth is really being tested again. Look, like the guy going into the draft that I was enamored with and was on record, it was Notre Dame safety Xavier Watts. I thought he might have been a really good day 2, early day 3 pick. He did go late on day 2. Felt like a guy that could really, really fit in this defense. They didn't address the class or the position in the draft class, and they did go out in undrafted free agency and get a few guys that we'll get a look at here at rookie minicamp this week. Major Burns being one of them. It is a position that like you can find guys on the street before you walk into training camp. So you do have these next couple months to figure out what you've got here and what you still might want and need. I've reminded fans here for the last few weeks, like this coaching staff, it feels like they've been here a while because we've been talking about them nonstop since January, but they haven't really had a practice with their full team yet. And so there's still a guessing game for a lot of positions at what they want to do and what they really have. We saw them offer extensions to a couple players in Kyler Gordon and TJ Edwards without ever seeing them practice, right? Like, and so that's a vote of confidence there. Well, now when you go see guys practice, you can learn a little bit more about your football team and see what you want to do. I do think it's notable that Dennis Allen, the last time we talked to him in April, talked about potentially experimenting with Kyler Gordon playing at the safety position at times, being both a slot corner, a nickel guy, and a guy that could go on that back end and play a little safety for you as well. So I think that caught everyone's attention as an experiment that's like really intriguing, but nobody knows what it'll look like. And so these next couple months will be interesting to see kind of how they fool around with that and what they ultimately decide and where they might pivot with other options.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just a final question, Dan, just on the UDFA, is there anyone brought in that you think, maybe was unlucky not to be drafted and maybe stands out as someone we could keep an eye on as the rookie minicamp starts and these players are brought in?
Full disclosure, I have not done a whole lot of deep diving on the UDFA class yet. I tend to wait for rookie camp and kind of start to dig into it then and get some eyes on them then. So the next time we talk, I promise I'll give you a better answer to this question. But for now, I'm going to kind of sidestep it a little bit and and kind of take the easy way out on that one.
Perfect. We don't need UDFA hero this year anyway. We have the Kyle Monangai story. He's going to be the hero training camp.
That's the movie that they're going to make at the end of this year, the Kyle Monangai story.
That'll be the one. I'll be buying my tickets for that opening weekend. Dan, really appreciate you coming on again, as always. If you want to just let the guys know if you've anything upcoming or where they can find you and, all that kind of info.
The most fun thing I've got coming up this week, Noel, is a mock schedule on Thursday at the Chicago Tribune, chicagotribune.com. You can find my guess at what the Bears 18-week, 17-game schedule will look like for 2025. It's a fun exercise I started doing last year, just as almost like a tongue-in-cheek thing, but it got great response and people love a good mock. And it's pretty interesting that there's this 7-month market for mock drafts and nobody does mock schedules. So I'm going to take ownership of the mock schedule market. And so you can find that this week. Sean Hammond and I, my colleague at the Tribune, we did a piece earlier this week answering 4 Bears topics in true or false fashion, including one question that is, does Caleb Williams now have everything he needs for 2025? You can weigh that one over and then compare your thoughts with the answers that Sean and I gave. Those are a couple things you can find up on chicagotribune.com. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the Take the North podcast, always flowing with content. We never stop, even though it's the off season. There's plenty to talk about with these Bears, always.
No such things in the off-season anymore. I'm looking forward to all that. I mean, look, we will remember this conversation, Dan, and next year when everybody is doing the mock fixture list, we'll know where it all started.
Credit where credit is due.
Dan, I will download this. I will put it in a vault, and we will have it there next year for proof. Again, terrific. Really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks to everyone for watching and listening. Please do continue to tune in because, as Dan says, there's always something week on week. There's the next kind of big milestone as we get closer to the season. Until next time, take care.